I never received it. That was all I said. Just 5 words, spoken loud enough to cut through the clinking champagne flutes and the generic pop music echoing across the rooftop patio. Our CEO, Preston Thorne, had just raised his glass to me. Well, to Roy, which is my middle name and what he calls me, whenever he is pretending to know the people who actually keep his company running. To Roy, he had beamed, looking out at the crowd of 60 employees. He hit every performance milestone this quarter and earned himself a neat $20,000 bonus. Cheers, everyone. The applause was immediate. Someone from sales shouted for me to buy the next round. But I did not raise my glass. I just looked at Preston from across the terrace, held his gaze, and said those 5 words. I never received it. The party did not stop instantly. It was more like a slow leak. The music kept playing, but the laughter died. Our CFO, Harvey Briggs, twitched so hard he nearly spilled his scotch. Beatrice Jenkins, the HR director, began coughing into her napkin. Eleanor Ross, the lead corporate counsel, stared into her glass as if she could find a legal loophole floating in the champagne. Preston did not lose his smile, but the corners of his eyes tightened. He let out a loud, hollow laugh. Ah, Roy, always the quiet one. I am sure it is just a processing lag. Payroll probably has it scheduled for Monday. I checked my account at 5 p.m. today, I said, keeping my voice even. Nothing. Beatrice made a high-pitched sound. We will get it sorted first thing Monday, Preston said, his voice rising a fraction of an octave. Tonight, enjoy yourself. You earned it. I set my full glass down on a high-top table. I just want to know what I am celebrating, I said. Then I walked to the elevators. I am 58 years old. When you reach my age in the tech industry, you learn that anger is a waste of energy. You do not yell, you do not write frantic emails, and you definitely do not cry in the parking garage. You just go home, make a grilled cheese, and open your laptop. I have been the chief systems architect at Aegis Operations Corp. for 9 years. I built the infrastructure that handles our vendor scheduling, automated routing, and cross-department data syncs. Preston Thorne likes to talk about synergy and cloud solutions in shareholder meetings, but the reality is simpler. If my code stops running, the company stops breathing. When I got home, I opened a local folder on my private machine. I did not call it something professional. I labeled it in case of stupidity. It contained 28 files. Most of them were routine logs. But there was also a copy of my employment contract from 3 years ago, when the company went through a major restructuring. I had insisted on drafting several clauses myself, including Clause 7.4. Aegis was in a cash crunch back then, and Preston was desperate to keep me from jumping to a competitor. He signed the contract over a Zoom call while eating takeout, barely glancing at the legal addendums. Eleanor Ross, who was new to the legal team at the time, skimmed it and filed it away. Clause 7.4 was very clear. Failure to disperse performance-based bonuses within 7 calendar days of confirmed milestone completion constitutes a material breach, allowing the employee to initiate proprietary protection protocols to safeguard individual intellectual property, effective immediately upon written notice. My milestone had been officially signed off by the board 7 days ago. The bonus was due today at 11:42 p.m. on Friday night. I sent a single email from my personal account to Preston, Harvey, Beatrice, and Eleanor. The subject line was Clause 7.4, Notice of Invocation. The body of the email was empty. Monday morning at the office felt different. On the surface, it was the usual corporate landscape. The fluorescent lights hummed, the coffee machine dripped, and people sat in their cubicles pretending to be busy. But there was an undercurrent of panic. By 9:15 a.m., Beatrice from HR had already walked past my desk 3 times. She finally stopped, holding a mug that said World's Best Team. "Hey, Donald," she said, her voice dripping with artificial cheer. "Terrible misunderstanding about the bonus on Friday. Just a system glitch. You know how the banking networks get over the weekend. We are on it." I did not look up from my monitor. "Okay," I said. She hovered for a few seconds, waiting for me to say more, but I did not. She eventually shuffled away. At 10:03 a.m., I received a calendar invite from Eleanor Ross. Subject: Urgent Contract Review. It was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. in the small conference room. The note at the bottom read, "Just a quick catch-up. No need to bring files." I printed out my transaction history, the contract, the signed milestone approval sheet, and 3 pages of system integration logs. I put them in a plain black folder and walked down the hall. The small conference room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. Eleanor was already there, sitting at the polished mahogany table with my contract open in front of her. A yellow post-it note marked page 7. She looked tired. She did not offer me coffee. She did not smile, Donald, she said, closing the folder. Have you actually initiated the protocols mentioned in clause 7.4? Yes, I said, sitting down and placing my black folder on the table. They went active at midnight. Eleanor leaned forward. You realize the implications of locking down the automated routing engine? The company cannot process vendor tickets without it. I did not lock it down, I replied. I activated the proprietary license verification loop. The systems are running on a temporary 120-hour grace period. If the license is not validated by the end of the countdown, the processes will automatically expire. She stared at me. You wrote this clause yourself. I did. And Preston signed it. It was a condition of my contract extension. Eleanor rubbed her temples. Preston thought it was just standard boilerplate language about data security. He did not read the addendum. He should have, I said. I built the architecture. Under federal copyright law, specifically 17 U.S.C. 201, work made for hire is owned by the employer. But Clause 7.4 is a written agreement to the contrary. If Aegis defaults on payment, the intellectual property rights for the proprietary routing modules revert to me. That is what Preston signed. Before Eleanor could respond, the door swung open. Preston Thorne walked in, holding a green smoothie. He looked annoyed, his tie slightly crooked. What is this meeting about? He asked, sitting down. Eleanor, tell me we are not spending company time on a payroll dispute. Eleanor handed him the contract. Read page 7, Preston. He invoked clause 7.4. Preston waved his hand dismissively. So what? We will pay him the $20,000. Harvey is processing the wire today. Eleanor's voice was very quiet. Preston, if he accepts a payment now, after the invocation, it has to be structured under the terms of the breach. Clause 7.4 states that any post-invocation payment must include a 15% administrative penalty, plus a formal licensing agreement for the grace period. Otherwise, it is legally defined as retroactive coercion. Preston's face flushed. That is ridiculous. Donald, you are a team player. You are not going to freeze our systems over a minor delay. It is not a delay, Preston, I said. It is a choice. You approved the milestone payouts for the rest of the executive team last week. Why was mine held? Preston opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor cut him off with a sharp look. We need to audit the payroll ledger, she said. We do, I agreed. And you have exactly 96 hours left on the clock. By Tuesday morning, the office smelled like secrets. It was not just the usual stench of overbrewed dark roast and whatever mystery lunch was rotating in the microwave. It was a sharper, colder scent, the smell of corporate survival. No one knew the details yet, but everyone knew the weather had changed. The casual morning chatter in the hallways had dried up. People walked with their heads down, eyes glued to their phones, clutching their mugs like shields. Preston Thorne was nowhere to be seen. Usually he strutted through the open-plan office by 9 a.m., booming out greetings and talking about the quarterly metrics. Today, his office door was shut, the frosted glass completely dark. Harvey Briggs, our CFO, did not look up when I passed him in the lobby. He was standing near the elevators, staring at the floor indicator, adjusting his cuffs with rapid, nervous movements. When the elevator doors opened and he saw me inside, he did not get in. He muttered something about needing to grab a water and turned away. Beatrice Jenkins from HR was in her office, one AirPod in, nodding frantically while typing. Her usual bubbly greeting was replaced by a tense, polite nod when she caught me looking through her window. I did not care. I had my own work to do. For the past 3 years, I had maintained what I called my personal safety net. It was not on the company network, and it was certainly not on the corporate cloud. It was a secure 2-terabyte external drive that lived in a locked drawer at my house. In our industry, you do not survive for 30 years by trusting the company to do the right thing. You survive by keeping your own records. I had seen too many developers get blamed for budget overruns they did not cause, and too many executives claim credit for products they could not explain. So I logged everything: system deployment timestamps, API logs, resource allocation requests, and financial approvals. Every time a vendor invoice was cleared, My system logged the metadata. Every time a budget was reallocated, I kept a copy. It was not illegal. It was just a backup of my own operational environment. During the lunch hour, I sat at a diner 2 blocks from the office, connected to my personal hotspot, and started combing through the Q4 accounting files I had archived. I was looking for a pattern, and I found it in under 20 minutes. The file structure was dry, filled with lines of alphanumeric codes and department tags. But once you knew how to read the plumbing, the leaks were obvious. Under a column labeled Strategic Project Realignment, I found 3 identical disbursements authorized on December 14th. The first 2 were strategic retention bonuses. One was for $25,000 and the other was for $30,000. They were approved for 2 vice presidents in the sales department. I knew for a fact that neither of them had hit their sales targets. In fact, one of them had been on a performance improvement plan since Q2. Yet their bonuses were approved, signed off by Preston Thorne and Harvey Briggs. But it was the third entry that made me stop chewing my club sandwich. It was a wire transfer of $25,000 to a contractor named Stuart Wellingham. The code tag was the same: Strategic Project Realignment. The approving signature belonged to Harvey Briggs, but there was no contractor ID. There was no tax documentation in the repository, no performance review, no milestone sign-off, and no active contract. I opened the Aegis Active Employee Directory. No Stuart Wellingham. I pulled the system access logs. There was an active account under the name S. Wellingham, created on November 2nd. It had been granted root-level database read access. I examined the onboarding log for that account. The template used to create it was identical to the one our QA team used for sandbox testing profiles. It was a dummy credential, a ghost profile. Normally, those profiles are deleted automatically after 48 hours. But this one had been modified. The auto-delete flag was turned off, and the account was linked to a direct deposit routing number at a bank in Delaware. A ghost employee receiving a $25,000 retention bonus from a project budget that just happened to have its performance pool reduced by exactly $20,000. My bonus. They had not just delayed my payment because of a payroll glitch. They had redirected the funds to cover their own backroom transactions. I sat in the diner booth, staring at the screen. I was not angry. I felt the clean, cold clarity that comes when a complex bug is finally identified. At 2:15 p.m., I walked to a public library 3 miles away. I did not use the office network. I logged onto the library public Wi-Fi, activated my personal VPN, and opened a secure, encrypted email account on a Swiss server. I kept the message short and completely free of emotion. 2. Internal Audit Committee. Aegis Operations Corp Board of Directors subject. Financial irregularities in Q4 discretionary disbursement. Baby. Please review the transaction ledger for December 14th under the memo tag Strategic Project Realignment. Specifically, examine the contractor profile for Stuart Wellingham, created on November 2nd using the QA onboarding template. Verify the existence of tax documentation for this profile, and trace the destination of the $25,000 wire transfer authorized by CFO Harvey Briggs. I did not sign my name. I did not ask for my money. I just clicked send. By the time I walked back to the office, the sky was turning a flat, bruised gray. The atmosphere inside the building was even heavier. As I passed the glass walls of the executive suite, I could see Eleanor Ross, our lead counsel, standing by the whiteboard. She was writing dates and names, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. Preston Thorne was pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly with his hands. Harvey Briggs sat at the table, his laptop open, staring at the screen with a completely blank expression. They did not see me. I walked to my desk, packed my bag, and logged out of my workstation at exactly 5:01 p.m. That evening, I made 3 copies of my encrypted audit logs. I drove to my sister's house and placed the first USB drive in her home safe. I mailed the second drive to my personal attorney in a sealed envelope, with a letter instructing him not to open it unless I failed to contact him for 72 hours. The third copy went into a small, unlabeled black drive that I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk at work, hidden under a stack of old instruction manuals. The fuse was lit. Aegis had exactly 72 hours left on the grace period. By Wednesday morning, Eleanor Ross looked like she was carrying the weight of the entire building on her shoulders. Her usual crisp blazer looked slightly rumpled, and she had a dark ring around her coffee mug that suggested it was her third refill before 10:00 a.m. She was standing outside the executive suite, staring at her phone, her thumb scrolling with a rapid mechanical rhythm. She was a good lawyer. I knew that. She had spent a decade protecting Aegis Operations Corp from tax audits, disgruntled vendors, and slip-and-fall lawsuits. But she had never had to deal with a structural failure. I decided it was time to give her an exit ramp. At 11:15 a.m., I walked up to her office door. The door was open, but she was staring blankly at her laptop screen, her fingers poised over the keyboard, but not moving. "Do you have 5 minutes, Eleanor?" I asked, leaning in. "Just you and me." She blinked, looking up. The corporate mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "Of course, Donald." "Come in." I walked in and shut the door behind me. I did not sit down immediately. Instead, I placed a black, plastic-bound folder on the center of her desk. It had a simple label on the front, "Privileged Internal Counsel, Only." "What is this?" she asked, looking at the folder but not touching it. "It is a roadmap," I said, sitting in the chair across from her. "It is a timeline of the Q3 and Q4 system deliverables, mapped against the banking disbursement logs and internal Slack metadata." Eleanor reached out, her fingers touching the edge of the plastic. "And what does this roadmap show?" "It shows that on December 14th, Aegis Operations Corp. issued a wire transfer of $25,000 to an out-of-state account under the name of Stuart Wellingham," I said, keeping my tone purely analytical. "It also shows that the account credential for S. Wellingham was created on November 2nd using a QA testing template, and that the root database log contains no employee identification or tax documentation." Eleanor's hand froze on the folder. I continued. "The folder also contains screenshots of a Slack conversation between Preston Thorne and Harvey Briggs from December 15th, where they discuss using the Q4 bonus pool to cover an invoice of $22,000 for a villa rental in Aspen, and how they plan to reallocate my bonus to the training budget to balance the ledger." She closed her eyes. For 3 seconds, she did not breathe. Then, she opened them and flipped the folder open. She read the first page, which was the timeline I had drafted. Then she turned to the second page, which showed the bank routing numbers and the authorization codes. I had highlighted Harvey Briggs's signature in yellow highlighter. Next came the Slack screenshots. I had printed them in color so the user avatars were clearly visible. The thumbs-up emoji Harvey had sent in response to Preston's instruction was outlined in red. "This is..." Eleanor started, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again, her lawyer voice returning. "Where did you get this information, Donald?" "I built the system, Eleanor," I said. "I designed the database schema. I set up the automated log archiving. Nothing happens on our servers without a trace, and I know exactly where the pipe joints are. You cannot delete a file in our environment without creating 3 other ledger entries in the backup vault." She turned to the last page. Her eyes scanned the text, and I saw her jaw tighten. "You are citing federal copyright law here," she said. "I am. Under 17 U.S.C. 201, a company owns the copyright to code written by an employee as a work made for hire. But Clause 7.4 of my contract, which Preston signed, specifically overrides that default. It is a written agreement, stating that if the company defaults on my milestone payments, the proprietary routing engine intellectual property reverts to me. But the routing engine is our core infrastructure," Eleanor said, her voice rising slightly. "We cannot operate the logistics platform without it." "Then you should have paid the $20,000 on time," I said. "If Aegis continues to run my proprietary modules after the 120-hour grace period expires, it is federal copyright infringement. Under 17 U.S.C. 504, the statutory damages for willful infringement can reach up to $150,000 per violation. Every automated transaction we process would count as a separate violation." She leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. "And the Stuart Wellingham wire?" she asked. "That is wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, I said. "And since the company is currently preparing its S-1 filing for the IPO, failing to disclose unauthorized executive compensation and dummy contractor accounts is a material omission. The Securities and Exchange Commission would halt the IPO before the first bell rings." Eleanor stared at the folder for a long time. The clock on her wall ticked. Outside her window, a train rumbled in the distance. "What do you want, Donald?" she finally asked, looking me in the eye. "I want what I earned," I said, "and I want the trash cleaned out." "I am giving you a choice, Eleanor. You can be the lawyer who helped them hide a corpse, or you can be the lawyer who saved the company by turning in the killers." She did not answer. I stood up and adjusted my jacket. "This folder stays with you," I said. "I mailed an identical copy to Charles Kessler on the board's audit committee last night. He should have it by tomorrow morning. You can choose to call him first, or you can wait for him to call you." I walked out of her office, leaving the door open. That afternoon, I saw Preston Thorne walk down the legal corridor 5 times. Each time he stopped by Eleanor's office, but her door was shut and the blinds were pulled. By 4 p.m., the receptionist mentioned to a colleague that Preston had called Eleanor's desk phone 4 times, but she had not picked up. I sat at my desk, quietly testing a backup deployment of the routing engine on my personal machine. The countdown was at 62 hours. By Friday morning, the executive floor smelled like a funeral that no one wanted to attend. It was quiet, over-polished, and filled with people pretending they were not waiting for the corporate coffin to drop. The whispers had started in the elevators. "Did you hear about the audit? Someone found payout files that do not match. Legal has been locked in meetings since Wednesday night. The board is asking questions." Preston Thorne had gone from peacocking to pacing. He was suddenly too busy for our morning team's syncs, ducking into back corridors and staring at his phone with red-rimmed eyes. He looked like a man who had spent the night trying to figure out which of his lies was going to catch up with him first. I sat at my desk and watched it play out. I did not need to say anything. Silence is a very heavy thing when people are waiting for an explosion. At 11:30 a.m., I received a formal email from Beatrice Jenkins in HR. The subject line was, "Urgent. Apologies regarding bonus miscommunication." It was corporate speak at its most desperate. The email acknowledged a clerical oversight, affirmed that my performance was highly valued, and offered to immediately initiate a retroactive wire transfer of the $20,000. I did not reply to her. I forwarded the thread to Eleanor Ross in legal, and then I sent a polite 2-line rejection to Beatrice. Per Clause 7.4, any attempt to issue funds post-invocation without a signed settlement and restitution agreement is defined as retroactive coercion. I must decline the transfer. Within 10 minutes, Eleanor had flagged the email chain. Beatrice did not walk past my desk again that day. At 1:15 p.m., my calendar pinged. It was an invite for a private video call from Charles Kessler, a senior member of our board of directors. Charles had been my mentor when I first joined Aegis Operations Corp., back before Preston Thorne inherited the CEO seat like a piece of cheap real estate. Charles was a rare breed in corporate circles. He actually cared about operational integrity. I accepted the invite and logged on from a quiet conference room. Charles appeared on the screen, sitting in a leather chair in his home office. He did not smile, but his expression was calm. "You look relaxed, Donald," he said. "I am," I replied. He nodded, leaning forward. "You always were a chess player. You never moved a piece unless you had already mapped out the next 4 turns. I waited, saying nothing. "I received your folder yesterday," Charles said. "The audit committee has already reviewed the bank transactions and the S. Wellingham profile. We have verified the wire transfer. I am glad the documentation was clear," I said. "It was," Charles said. "But I want to know what your terms are before this goes to the regulatory level. What happens at midnight when your grace period expires? If the breach is not resolved under the terms of Clause 7.4, the licensing rights for the automated routing modules will expire," I said. "Any continued use of the code will constitute willful copyright infringement. I have already drafted the provisional complaint for the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the material omission in the S1 filing." Charles let out a slow, heavy breath. "Preston has no idea what he stepped into, does he? Preston thinks everything can be smoothed over with a handshake and a promise," I said. "He does not understand that when you steal from the foundation, the roof falls on your head." "Are you looking to replace him?" Charles asked. "No," I said. "I am looking to remove him." Charles stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. "The audit committee will contact you directly, Donald." Keep your phone close. He ended the call without another word. At 5:15 p.m., the office was empty. The desk sat abandoned under the cold fluorescent lights. I packed my laptop and walked down to the parking garage. As I reached my sedan, a shadow moved from behind a concrete pillar. It was Preston. He had pulled his tie loose, and his hair was messy. He looked smaller than he did on the rooftop patio. "Donald," he said, his voice echoing in the concrete space. "Look, this whole thing, it has gotten out of hand. It was just a misunderstanding. We had some cash flow issues with the Aspen retreat and the VPs, and we had to shuffle some numbers. It was not personal. I unlocked my car and tossed my bag into the passenger seat. Let's just settle this between us," Preston said, stepping closer. "I will get Harvey to write you a check for $30,000 right now. 10,000 more than the bonus. We can just tear up page 7 of the contract and pretend this week never happened." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes, the desperation of a man who had never been held accountable in his life. "The grace period expires at midnight, Preston," I said. "Come on, Donald," he pleaded, reaching for my car door. "We are a family here. Don't burn the bridge." "I did not burn the bridge, Preston," I said, starting the engine. "I just turned it into a drawbridge, and I am the only one holding the lever." I closed the door, backed out of the space, and left him standing there in the exhaust fumes. By 10:15 p.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the digital countdown clock on my screen. It was at 1 hour and 45 minutes. My inbox pinged. It was an automated notification from our database access logs. Beatrice Jenkins had attempted to log into the payroll engine and force a manual ledger correction of $20,000 to my account. 8 minutes later, a system log showed the transaction was blocked. The override had been canceled by Eleanor Ross. The log entry read, "Transaction blocked per clause 7.4 dispute. Unauthorized transfer prohibited." Even Eleanor was protecting the company by keeping Preston from digging a deeper hole. At 11:59 p.m., the countdown reached 0. I pressed a single key on my laptop. The licensing server at Aegis Operations Corp sent out an automated handshake request. It did not find the validation token. Across the entire network, the routing engine quietly went dark. The grace period was over. The boardroom at 9 a.m. on Monday was a mausoleum dressed in mahogany. 12 chairs were filled, 2 were empty, and the air was thick with the quiet hum of expensive air conditioning and sheer desperation. I sat at the far end of the room. I did not sit at the main table. I chose a chair by the window. I did not dress for a negotiation. I wore a simple black suit, carried a single leather folder, and brought the quiet weight of 30 years in the tech industry. Next to me sat Timothy Cole, the external compliance auditor. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke only in numbers. He was here to verify the technical reality. The core routing engine was officially offline. Eleanor Ross stood at the head of the table. Flanking her were 2 senior partners from an outside law firm. On the table in front of her was a black binder 3 inches thick. It contained the complete audit trail. Preston Thorne was not in the room. He had been suspended by the board at 8 a.m., pending the results of this meeting. Harvey Briggs, the CFO, was present, but he did not look like an executive anymore. He sat near the door, his skin the color of wet paper, his hands trembling as he adjusted a pen that he was not using. Beatrice Jenkins from HR sat next to him, her eyes wide, blinking rapidly, as if she could blink away the reality of the room. Eleanor opened the meeting without a greeting. "We are here to address the invocation of Clause 7.4 by Donald Roy Vance," she said, her voice echoing off the wood paneling. "The compliance audit has confirmed that the performance milestones were completed on schedule and the Q4 bonus of $20,000 was withheld without contractual justification." She paused, looking down at the binder. "Furthermore, the audit has revealed that the funds allocated for this milestone were redirected via wire transfer on December 14th to an account associated with a contractor profile named Stuart Wellingham. Our investigations have confirmed that this profile is fraudulent, created using a temporary QA access template, and that the funds were used to cover personal expenses authorized by Preston Thorne and Harvey Briggs." A quiet rustle went through the board members. None of them looked surprised. They had already seen the pre-read. "Timothy," Eleanor said, turning to the auditor. What is the current status of our operational infrastructure? The automated routing engine is locked, Timothy said, his voice flat. The proprietary modules are watermarked with unique cryptographic signatures. Any attempt to bypass the block or migrate the database schemas will trigger a licensing violation and invalidate the integrity of our logistics pipeline. In plain terms, the platform cannot process vendor transactions without Donald's validation key. One of the board members, a woman in a gray suit, leaned forward. Can we not simply rebuild the routing engine? Timothy gave a dry chuckle. It would take a team of 6 developers at least 8 months to replicate the architecture. During that time, Aegis would have to handle routing manually. We would lose 80% of our transaction capacity by tomorrow morning. The board member sank back into her seat. Charles Kessler, who was chairing the meeting, turned his gaze to me. Donald, he said, you have the floor. I did not stand up. I remained seated by the window, my hands resting on my folder. This is not a negotiation, I said, keeping my voice quiet and steady. This is a settlement. You owe me the $20,000 bonus. That is the baseline. I opened my folder and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. You also owe me the penalties outlined in Clause 7.4. Since the breach was not cured within the 120-hour grace period, the statutory penalties are tripled. That is $60,000. I tapped the document. Additionally, you will pay a retroactive licensing fee of $45,000 for the use of my proprietary routing modules over the last 3 years. If you wish to continue using the architecture after I leave, the licensing fee will be $12,000 per month, paid quarterly in advance. Harvey Briggs let out a low groan and put his head in his hands. No one looked at him. What about the legal filings? Charles Kessler asked. I have already drafted the provisional complaint for the SEC, I said. If we do not reach a signed agreement before the close of business today, my attorney will file it. As you know, Aegis is preparing to file its S-1 prospectus for the upcoming IPO. A pending SEC investigation for financial fraud and an active intellectual property dispute over your core operating platform must be disclosed as a material risk. It will halt the IPO immediately. The room went completely silent. The board members looked at each other. They knew I was not bluffing. I had no interest in their stock options, their corporate titles, or their apologies. I wanted what was mine, and I was perfectly willing to let their company fall apart to get it. Charles Kessler cleared his throat. We will take a 10-minute recess. The recess lasted exactly 11 minutes. When the board members returned, Harvey Briggs was gone. Beatrice Jenkins was packing her laptop, her hands shaking. Charles Kessler looked at me. We accept your terms, Donald, he said. The board has voted to terminate Preston Thorne for cause, effective immediately. Harvey Briggs has submitted his resignation, which has been accepted. We will issue the wire transfer for $125,000 today. The licensing agreement for the routing modules will be executed by Eleanor's team before 5:00 p.m. And the public record? I asked. The internal company announcement will state that your departure is voluntary and that the company has resolved a contractual dispute to your full satisfaction, Charles said. I stood up, picked up my folder, and latched it shut. Once the funds are cleared in my account, my attorney will release the validation keys to Eleanor, I said. I walked toward the door. I did not look back at the board table, or at Beatrice, or at the empty chairs. I had spent 9 years building the nervous system of Aegis Operations Corp. I had done it quietly, sitting in my cubicle while younger men ran around chasing titles and credit. They had thought my quietness was weakness. They were wrong. I walked out of the building and into the bright Monday morning sun. The drawbridge was up, and I was finally going home. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge.